So welcome to our second part of our discussion in our conference, Digitally United Against Hate, here at Alums for Campus Fairness. I'm honored to moderate. I'm honored to have so many friends and partners with us and to join us. First, on my screen, to my right, is Daron Ezekson. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly. I hope I did, Daron. Daron is the Vice President of the Mid-Atlantic / the Midwest Division of the ADL. As Vice President of the Mid-Atlantic / Midwest Division, Daron and his teams in Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Philly, go Philly, Washington, D.C., they work daily to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. I'll continue to tell everyone else's stories as well so that we can just dive right into it. We also have then, next is Rachel Fish, who's the founding executive director for the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism. Dr. Rachel Fish is the founding executive director of the foundation. Robert Kraft, who's the owner of the New England Patriots, established the foundation to catalyze dynamic new solutions to stop the age-old hatred advanced by those who seek the elimination of Judaism and the Jewish people, and the modern movement to destroy the world's only Jewish state, being Israel. Again, part of my brevity, but I'll just move on to Carly Gamble, who's the director of Stand With Us' Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, and she's the counsel for litigation strategy at the Stand With Us Side Off Legal Department. So she wears multiple hats. And Carly is a seasoned constitutional litigator with extensive experience handling matters involving free speech and religious liberties and fighting anti-Semitism. So thank all of you for joining us and for being a part of our very important conversation that we're having. I appreciate you all coming from all over the country to be with us here and to have a really important conversation, I think, that is quite apropos right now. So let's just dive into it. If any of you, whoever wants to kick it off, how has the nature and scope of anti-Semitism changed since the pandemic began? You know, obviously we've had a pandemic now for a year. What have you seen in changes? And maybe, Daron, maybe we want to start with you. You can talk about the audit and what you've seen, what the ADL has seen as well. And then we can pass it on to Carly, Rachel, whoever wants to take it from there. So Daron, please.
Thank you, Avi, and thank you all for the invitation and for your participation in this really important conversation today. It's really a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to learning from my co-panelists as well. You know, we at the ADL have been in the business, unfortunately, of combating anti-Semitism for 108 years. And we all know that anti-Semitism is, in its perennial forms, entirely capable of accommodating new politics, new challenges. It is particularly acute in times of social stress, economic stress. And what we have witnessed over the last several years are unprecedented levels of reported anti-Semitic incidents. That's the audit that Avi referred to. We just announced yesterday the results of our 2020 audit, which reflected on a national level a slight decrease year to year of overall incidents. But depending on geography, it did demonstrate, as was referenced in some states, significant increases. And what it also demonstrated is, notwithstanding COVID and sort of our retreat into our virtual spaces, that the hate metamorphosized itself into many forms of online hate, and really disturbingly, the level of harassment increased and the number of incidents of harassment increased. You know, there are other metrics to measure the state of anti-Semitism, if you will, and we also look at attitudes. In a recent survey, we confirmed that 63% of American Jews have experienced some form of anti-Semitism in the last 5 years. That 36% of those incidents are online, in the online space, and more about online as we continue our conversation. And fully 59% of American Jews surveyed say they feel less safe than they did a decade ago. So what is reflected in the incidents is not the whole story, but it is a warning sign that we are in a period in our history, as we have been in the past, both American history and Jewish history, obviously, where permission has been given. We have a new platform that enables the leveraging of old hate and the emergence of new. And we see it on both ends of the political spectrum. We see it coming out, and we'll talk more about that, in the form of emerging violent white nationalism or white supremacy, and we see it in the context of many spaces related to anti-Zionism. So it is a picture of elevated incidents and an elevated sense of concern across the Jewish community.
Thank you. Carly or Rachel? It looks like Carly, you're unmuted, so I'll pass it to you.
Thanks. I think I would just add to that. I mean, obviously the ADL does a fantastic job when it comes to the statistics on these things and gathering the reports on that. I think that, that everything that was just mentioned, what that lends itself to, because we are seeing so much more online anti-Semitism. I think the thing that jumps out really the most to me is just like, you asked about the scope, and because of the global nature of the internet, I think that it has just magnified the exposure and the mobilization, if you will, of anti-Semitism. That the audience has grown in some ways for people who maybe wouldn't have necessarily engaged in it, wouldn't have been their first thought, right, to go online with their anti-Semitism, but during the pandemic, that's really been the outlet that's available. And so again, I think that again, that what's really been highlighted for me, and what we've seen and I know we'll talk about this more some too, just on campuses, that there's been a shift, and so the exposure, the audience has grown in many ways. And one of the things that we saw, thankfully, I feel like we've seen a little bit of a downward trend in it, but one of the I guess issues with the scope of this is when celebrities take to social media to make comments, and unfortunately we've seen a number over the course of the last year of anti-Semitic statements, whether they were intended or not, by celebrities, and again, just thinking about the global scope and the following of people. And so when more people are online on a more regular basis, and then you've got people with huge followings online that are perpetuating some of these thoughts and ideas, again, I think that just magnifies things, in a way that unfortunately, we like to talk about in some ways how, even we are able to reach more people with our message, with our education, and the things we've been able to accomplish from home. But unfortunately, this is something that's being, quote unquote, accomplished as well on the side of anti-Semitism and anti-Semites.
Thank
Right,
you.
Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Carly and Daron. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I just want to build on what was already said, which is the internet is a loud and obnoxious space, period. And because of that, it also lends itself towards greater incivility. What you say online, you wouldn't necessarily say in the public square. And individuals do so also with a sense of anonymity. So it exacerbates exactly what you're saying, Carly and Daron, in terms of what is playing out in the different social media platforms and in terms of digital content. We also know that some of the individuals who may not necessarily engage in this conversation, if it was live, so to speak, are more emboldened to do so from the security of the privacy of their home. And not only that, what we are finding is that in an age in which we know people, like always, have desired connection and meaning and seeking community, at the same time are becoming less engaged with established organizations, less affiliated with traditional forms of community, and are more individualized. So when they tend to seek community, they're turning to places in which their ideas can be radicalized more quickly. And they will find ideas that can be seductive because it seems as if they are, quote unquote, seen by individuals who are actually promulgating really hate-filled, vitriolic positions. And that can come from the political right, it can come from the political left, it can come from different communal identity groups. And we know that identity politics, unfortunately, is the way in which our society is engaging with one another, which continues to lead to this divisiveness and this politicization. And when that happens, Jews ultimately are in the crosshairs between all of these groups and does not lend itself to a productive position for the Jewish community.
Great points by all, and thank you for sharing. To that end, I wanted to, we're talking a lot about online. Rachel, I think you hit the nail on the head about, people are sharing things online that they would never say to someone's face. And that's certainly happening to students as well. We're seeing a lot of students being attacked, and actually we partnered with an organization called Jewish on Campus. They spoke on a webinar of ours a few months ago, and we're working on a survey with them of current students to share about their experiences, and recent alumni to share about their experiences of anti-Semitism on campuses. And they're sharing a lot of different situations of things that are happening on campuses, whether it be in real life or online. But to that end, to being online, what are the most effective ways to combat anti-Semitism? What do you think we can be doing about it? Rachel, I know that you're working on a nice initiative. Maybe you can start us off.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing that I have to say, as much as I appreciate what Jewish on Campus is doing, and it is providing an outlet for students, it's highly problematic ultimately that all of this is being done with anonymity, meaning none of these students actually put their name out there and are reluctant to do so. And I know how hard it is. I have been in those situations as a student, but it's problematic if we don't put our names on these things, because it's like Harvey Milk, right? When Harvey Milk was encouraging folks from the LGBTQ plus community to come out, it was the coming out that humanizes those experiences. When you realize, your Uncle Larry is gay, it doesn't make you like Uncle Larry any less. It helps you understand who Uncle Larry is, or your favorite PE coach, whomever it may be. So when we don't humanize these situations and we're constantly hiding behind fear, and I'm not suggesting that it isn't challenging or that it's not hard, but it actually doesn't help solve so much of the challenges, because we as individuals, as humans, are not seen. And so it creates this illusion of what is actually taking place on campus. And I also will say, with people like Eliza Lewin, Carly, and other lawyers from Lawfare, students have a real ability to be empowered. It's not like 20 years ago. There are real actions that can be taken at the level of the student, to the faculty, to the university administration. We have to stop thinking that we as Jews need to hide behind the insecurities in order to actually be heard. It's really problematic. And again, knowing it's hard. What I would just tell too is that the work that we're doing through the Foundation to Combat Anti-Semitism is mostly through our public facing initiative right now. And that public facing initiative is through the social media work that we've created called Together Beat Hate, which is trying to put the Jew hatred conversation in relationship with other forms of hatred, not to universalize and diminish the unique characteristics of each form of prejudice and bias and discrimination that exists, but so that we do not continue to silo Jew hatred as something that shouldn't be recognized as a form of hatred, or only be a Jewish problem. Meaning, we know that in order to fight racism, it's not solely up to Black people and brown people and people of color, but it should be all of humanity. Similarly, to fight transphobia and homophobia, we need all individuals to engage in that work. So we want to put the Jew hatred conversation in relationship to these other forms of hatred. And also because what we realized is that the majority of folks that we're trying to reach, which are 13 to 35-year-olds in the middle, so not the detractors and not the people who are on this call, but the majority of folks who truly don't know. And what they don't know is that they don't know what anti-Semitism is. They have no idea. The reason we know they have no idea is because when we actually surveyed 10,500 13 to 35-year-olds, they said, well, I'm anti-racist, I'm anti-homophobic, I'm anti-Islamophobic. So yeah, I'm probably an anti-Semite. And you're thinking, no, you're an anti-Semite, right? But they don't even know what the term Semite means. So we have to change the conversation in order to make sure that don't knows put anti-Semitism in this framing, and so that we can make Jew hatred socially unacceptable in the 21st century.
And if I could add to that, Rachel, in absolute agreement. And part of this is education. And by the way, I think education begins with the Jewish community in this regard. We find that many students Jewish students are not sufficiently trained or empowered to understand what they will face on campus, to have the arguments understood, to understand the resources available to them. There is, even within the Jewish community, a lack of sufficient understanding of what current day anti-Semitism is, or for that matter, the definitions of Zionism and what Zionism represents. And we do need to take back the meaning of Zionism. In too many spaces, Zionism, as it was reflected on a T-shirt during the Capitol insurrection, somebody wore, or I'm sorry, it was in a different context that somebody wore a T-shirt saying all the isms they're against, and Zionism was right below anti-Semitism, as if, and we don't own the term the way we need to own it, and there is work to be done on campus in that regard. But the other thing I want to validate in what Rachel was saying in terms of education and making sure that both the Jewish community and potential allies are knowledgeable, is that we will only succeed, in our view, and this has been the ADL's position for as long as we've engaged in the dual purpose of fighting both anti-Semitism and all other forms of hate, is that in allyship across different types of hate and different communities, it lies the power to secure the ability to hold people accountable when they cross the line. And I'm not saying that that's where we are right now in a lot of left spaces, and particularly on campus, but there is, in the longer term strategy here, along with the tactics that I heard at the end of the last panel, which I think are critical, there is relationship building to be done. There is outreach to be done. There is education to be done, even as we seek to hold accountable in very specific incidents, people who are over the line, and explain to them or to the administration officials or others who are called upon for accountability. So we have a multi-front challenge here. And I just don't want to lose the fact that we need to operate in several parallel ways and parallel spheres, not necessarily in total lockstep. I know a lot of different organizations have different ways that they approach this. We all come to it with the same intent, which is, how do we combat this re-emerging or newly emerging form of hatred towards Jewish people, and how do we stop this notion that that being Jewish means you're synonymous with every act that Israel commits, that somehow you're responsible for every act that Israel commits, which is, in the minds of some of these opponents, the way they approach the world and how they justify their own statements of violence. And that is unacceptable on campus. It is unacceptable anywhere in our society. So we need to work together, to Rachel's point, to understand who understands what. Look at Holocaust denialism, which is a whole nother indicator of the state of the country here. We have a majority of young adults in America who don't know what Auschwitz is. We see a strong and growing prevalence of Holocaust denialism in online content. We saw that 10% of gamers, of young people who play online games, are exposed to Holocaust denialism in the gaming context. What is that about? We need to stop that in the online context wherever it appears. And that's one of the focuses of ADL through our Center on Extremism and our Center on Technology and Society.
And I'll just add something. Yeah, I'm just going to add a couple of quick things, and just want to say that I completely agree, and I'm actually really encouraged to hear, because I'm hearing it more and more and more, and I think it's a good thing, this understanding, as Rachel said, that we've got to humanize these issues, right? They can't just be agenda items, and they can't just be this big issue. I find myself talking to college students all the time about this, that why do we care about racism? Why do we care about sexism? Why should we care about anti-Semitism? It's because it affects people, right? We have to humanize this. And so I think that that's crucial. And I'm so encouraged to hear that that's coming. And I'm, in the many different ways that I'm involved in combating anti-Semitism, whether it's on campus, whether we're dealing with ICC issues, whatever it is, I'm hearing it more and more, coupled with allyship, right? With finally kind of overcoming, for years, intersectionality has excluded Jews, and particularly pro-Israel Zionist Jews. And I feel like we're in a moment right now where we're we're trending better in that regard, and we are building allies. And again, and it goes back to, again, something else that Rachel said, like, I just feel like I should have been able to, interject right after each of her bullet points, because I think that one of the things that is starting to gain some momentum in terms of understanding, like, again, like Rachel said, those of us on this call, I think, all understand that just like racism is wrong, and just like sexism is wrong, and the other isms are wrong, for some reason anti-Semitism keeps getting a pass. And I say for some reason, I think we know some of the reasons, but continuing to remind and to do it in an educational, persuasive way, again, in a humanizing way, that anti-Semitism deserves no lesser condemnation than any of these other isms, any of these other forms of discrimination. And I think that's starting to gain some momentum in terms of understanding, some traction there. And again, I think it's all kind of happening at the same time, that others are willing to stand with the Jewish community a little bit more, and there's a little more of a sense of importance about allyship, and also about humanizing things. And so I just want to mention a couple of specifics in this regard, in terms of how I'm seeing it happen, especially with regard to combating online anti-Semitism. One of the things that our Florida office just did this, I think it's incredible, and I don't know why we didn't think of it sooner, but sooner or later, creative minds come up with these great ideas. They came up with this campaign in the wake of the Myers-Leonard situation with the Miami Heat, right? And Doron talking about online gaming and being exposed to things. Obviously, I think we're all familiar with the comments that were made, and that was a situation where, at least ostensibly, this individual didn't even know what it was he was saying. He didn't understand the anti-Semitic nature of some of the language. But in the wake of that, our Florida office, our Southeast office, decided to create a mural. And again, it wasn't just focused on anti-Semitism. It was focused on being united against all forms of hate. Anti-Semitism, racism, all forms of hate. And then, and this is where I really think that there's an opportunity for combating online anti-Semitism, and it's through a kind of a grassroots effort. The students in that area got really excited about this and said, hey, maybe we can do something more with this, and maybe we can do something online with it. So they created this, it's #DunkOnHate campaign, and it's like the ALS water bucket challenge, right? And it's take a video of yourself dunking a basketball and telling why you stand against whatever form of hate it is, and then challenging 3 other people online to do the same, to kind of create this movement and create awareness. So again, I think that it's a positive way to say, hey, look, this is happening and it's not going anywhere, but we recognize the need to not only bring awareness to it, but to try to bring some positivity and bring people together, again, in this. It's not just about a Jewish problem. It's not just about a problem for people of color, but when any one of these things is allowed to fester and is fostered within society, it's going to affect all of us. And so I think that is starting to become more of a universal understanding. And again, I that may sound a little overly optimistic, but I'm just seeing more and more traction. And so it encourages me that while yes, the numbers are going up in a negative way in terms of increasing anti-Semitism, I think that people are coming together and finding creative ways to push back, and to recognize that anti-Semitism is wrong, just like racism is wrong, just like sexism. So those are the couple of things. The other thing I guess I should add real quickly is, I think another way that's important in the context of fighting online anti-Semitism and humanizing it is, when you have some education and you're confronted personally, and I've recently heard stories about individuals who have had some success in just having some one-on-one dialogue, because they are armed with some facts, and they're able to have these conversations and be somewhat open-minded and be reasonable and rational. And I'm just hearing more and more stories about people being able to move the needle just a little bit, and like I tell students all the time, if you have an encounter like this and you have a conversation with somebody who, Rachel's talking about the don't knows, if you're talking to somebody who's staunchly in, that camp of being an anti-Semite or anti-Zionist form, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for them. And you get them to walk away from that conversation saying, oh, well, I didn't know that. I'll have to think about that. That's a win, right? That's progress. And it's not all going to happen in a single conversation. And so I'm seeing more and more of this happening too. And so I think that that's another important way, like I said, just dealing with human beings on a human being level, that one-on-one and having these conversations, I feel like is another really important way that we can begin to move this in the right direction.
Sure. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. It's all really important. I think all the work that we're doing. I think one of the challenges, I'm just going to diverge a little bit, is, obviously there's extremism on both sides, on the right and on the left, and it's how do we counter that on campuses, as alumni, et cetera. There's one of the reasons I know that Jews are targeted many times on campus is that we're characterized as white. We're the oppressors. Laurie asked the question, one of our co-founders, maybe we should also be speaking out against other stereotyping of whites as white oppressors as part of our efforts to fight hatred against all groups. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, how do we counter that hatred? Maybe Daron, if you want to kick us off on that.
Sure. I think it's really important, again, to understand dynamics. And I appreciate that, and some folks have shared in the chat their view that perhaps ADL leans one direction or another. I'd love to have the opportunity to demonstrate otherwise, although there's not enough time. But I think we do need to understand what the underlying ideological basis is for opposition to Jews, whether it's on the far left or it's on the far right. And I would argue that there are more similarities than you might think, or for those of us who have done the thinking, we find more similarities than we might suspect. And so what the opportunity is actually for a conversation to demonstrate that the extremism of the right and the growing, what I characterize as absolutism on the left, it bears characteristics that not only target Jews and are rooted in historical tropes about Jewish power and abuse of or murdering of children or financial control, but also are fundamentally anti-democratic. They undermine the notion of democracy that I dare say has provided a degree of security for the Jewish community in this country that is unprecedented in modern history. And so I think trying to find, it's not to bootstrap, it's not to elevate one over the other qualitatively. They both exist. You should know that in our audit, we found slightly more, we were reported to us were slightly more incidents of campus-related Zionist-oriented anti-Semitism. But it was a matter of 2 percentage points difference between the white supremacy that was reported against Jews on campus, right? So these strains both exist. They're both activated. And interestingly, there's an anti-Israel strain on the far right also and calls for violence and characterizations of Israel and the control by Israel of our own military and the like. And so if we can, as a community, and we've got so much creativity in our community, we have such resource and commitment to the problem, that if we can ourselves look for how do we orient people in the vast middle to understand these problems are of equal concern. They are based equally on untenable constructs that not only are rooted in hate, but are also rooted in a challenge to our democracy. I think therein lies the opportunity for us to emerge, not to conquer all anti-Semitic hate. We have always seen it in this country. We've always seen it in every country. The issue is we want to prevent the mainstreaming of it, right? We want it to prevent it from creeping into, and one of the things that is very troubling, we also do a survey on attitudes towards Jews. And we are really at an unprecedentedly positive time in America about the overall attitude of Americans, non-Jewish Americans, towards Jews. And yet, the majority of Americans still harbor a number of stereotypes or tropes about Jews, and it's even more extreme when we go to Europe and to other countries, Latin America and Asia as well. And so there is still real work to be done. So, my suggestion, my plea even, is that we look for ways in which our alternative worldviews, our alternative, beliefs in how we respond, do not divide the sharing of perspectives in the alliance of Jewish organizations and Jewish communities against this common challenge, whether it emerges on the far left or on the far right. Because I think if we are set against each other in this process, only the haters win.
Thanks, Daron. I'm curious, Rachel or Carly, if you have any thoughts as well about the extremisms on either side of the aisle, obviously.
I think my first comment would be I'm not sure how extreme they are anymore, meaning the pendulum and the spectrum has shifted. And what we have to realize is that the far right and the far left are much closer towards the middle than to the polar extremes, which should concern everyone on this call, whether you vote Republican or vote Democrat. And that should be a wake-up call for us, meaning when you're on college campus and when we're working with students on college campus, these are not individuals who proclaim to be part of the socialist Marxist movements. They may be. They don't know what they're talking about, by the way, when they say those things. It just sounds intellectually curious to them. But what they actually are doing is saying, well, in order to be part of the litmus test for what makes me progressive, for how I show that I'm for the other, quote unquote, is by demonstrating that I'm anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, that I believe that we need to strengthen the weak and weaken the strong, that I'm anti-racist, and I also will denounce Zionism because it's perceived as being colonialist and imperialist, because we haven't reclaimed what Zionism actually is. And those are not far positions anymore. Those aren't extremes. Those are entering the mainstream discourse. And I will tell you that 20 years ago, when we saw these things happening on campus, people said to me in the Jewish community, what happens on campus stays on campus. Don't worry about it, Rachel. And I would say, this isn't Vegas. What happens on campus goes beyond campus. It enters mainstream politics. It enters the media. It enters the discourse around government, local politics, and policy. And it's absolutely entering educational environments, K through 12. You better believe that this is happening in your kids' elementary school, your grandchildren's elementary school, before they ever set foot on college campus. And that's just from the left. We can equally dissect what's happening on the right. So, because it is in video games, just as Daron said, it is the discourse that enters the waters, that is happening in certain groups, whether it's the African-American community where Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam is still lauded. And we're afraid to find the right people to help be the right messengers because we know that it's a complex conversation and a tenuous relationship with the African-American and Black community. We need Jewish leadership who's not afraid of doing that. So I would say until we start to really, really call it out on both sides and recognize that they're not very far, but they're way much closer together than we would like to see, then we are not actually at all awake and alert to the threats that are facing the Jewish community.
And if I could state in an affirming way what Rachel just said in terms of Israel, I would argue that the threat to Israel is not the individual threat to the student on campus, as painful and as difficult as that might be, and we need to build resilience, but rather it is the formation of cross-cultural coalitions in opposition to Israel. That is what is happening. And the campus is a microcosm of society writ large, but that is not the only front in this particular battle, obviously, in this particular war. And so as much as it impacts us as individuals or our children as individuals, we need to keep our eye on the broader normalization that is occurring of hate on both sides, as Rachel referenced.
Thank you. We are just about out of time, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us and for having this conversation. I think it's a really important one. And I wanted to give the floor to you all one more time to see if you all had any closing remarks you wanted to share with our alumni who obviously are quite concerned with what's happening on campuses as we evolve from this, COVID pandemic and moving from online back to in real life, how things are will be changing and are changing as quite literally as we speak. I wanted to give you all an opportunity to share some final thoughts with our audience. So maybe Carly, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, sure. I think I just want to echo something that was said at the end of the last panel, which and then combine it with I think there's very little that you could do that is more important than to continue to educate yourself about what's happening. And again, obviously that's why you're here. You're here to educate yourselves, to hear from those of us who are on the campus, working on the campus, working, with these students and with these organizations, about what is it that's actually happening on the campuses, and then what are the resources that are available. And so again, I commend you for doing that, but also to then take that information and educate those that are within your sphere of influence about these things, because as alums, you do have, we all do, we have power. And I realize it may be kind of slow going sometimes seeing that work itself out. But again, this is one of the things that I'm hearing more and more about alums who have the ears of administrators, of those with the direct authority on campuses in particular. And so the more educated you are about what's happening, about what the resources are, it was mentioned, I think, during the last panel, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and how important it is to get the word out about that definition and why it's so important. Not just what it is, but how it can be utilized, but the accurate information, because there's like everything else in this sphere. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I didn't think that I was going to be in this field dealing with the Holocaust as a controversial matter. How controversial is history? Apparently this is a really controversial matter right now. Why is a definition of anti-Semitism so controversial? I mean, I know some of the answers as to why people are trying to make a controversy out of this, but educating ourselves about the tools that really will help to combat some of this, because again, a lot of what we see on campuses is not just what's happening, but it's the inability on largely of those who are in positions of authority to identify it as anti-Semitism. Rachel's talking about how this demographic, 13 to 35 doesn't even know what the word means. And I would venture to say that a lot of administrators, even if they think they do, they don't really understand what anti-Semitism looks like, and what it means. They don't understand, as Rachel said, we're trying to reclaim the term Zionism and help others to understand what all that encompasses, right? It's not just this or just that. We have a tendency to focus on single manifestations of Zionism without understanding that it's a much broader concept. And so again, helping administrators and those student leaders to understand that. And I think that the IHRA definition is a really crucial tool in doing that. So again, I would just say that that's one of the things, one of the positives I would say that's come out of this pandemic, at least for me, for what I do, is I can reach more people. And more often, right? I don't have to get on an airplane and travel to be in front of people. Don't get me wrong, I miss that. And I think that dynamic is really important. And I look forward to that happening again. But for the time being, I can reach a larger audience about, with this information. And then the hope and the goal is that that you guys, as you get that education, you take that and you educate those who are within your sphere of influence about these things, to help push back and to help, again, I feel like I'm just parroting what Rachel's saying, but I just agree with it. Being able to empower students on campus to be able to deal with and address these things, to again, make sure that they can provide some of this information and this education. Again, I think those are the things that are really crucial right now for alums to really be focusing on.
I just want to add one thing, Avi, and then I'm happy to sign off. It is really important for all alumni to recognize that it's not just about the current students. We all care about students, but the alumni on this call have the ability to ask the questions of the university about faculty issues, funding issues, and administration issues. And you have more power to do that than the student has. And you can hold the university more accountable than a student can in the current moment if you ask the questions about who funds the Middle East Studies Department, who's funding the Arab Studies program, where does Muslim Student Association get its money, where are the faculty that are most vocal who are supportive of BDS, where are the faculty who are silent, countering BDS, why? What is the university administration's responsibility in order to address these issues? Can they stop hiding behind academic freedom and political freedom of speech in order to actually be responsible administrators and gain the necessary education that sensitizes them to understand the complexities of Judaism, Jews, and Zionism? So it's up to you all to make sure you are asking those questions. Do not hold these students on campus responsible for that. That's our job.
And I don't want to, Duran, I don't want to speak over you, but I do want to just say again, to Rachel's point, if that's information that you're willing to take the initiative to try to get, and you can't get it, and you're dealing with a public entity, we can help you get that information through public records requests. So there are tools, again, I just want to make sure people know that there are tools available to get that information if a simple ask doesn't get you there.
And I'll just finish by saying equally, the basic education of what is anti-Semitism, what is anti-Zionism, what are the concerns, those materials also exist to help you get educated and to offer students that education, administrators and others in coalition. And I recommend to you a resource we put out last year called Anti-Semitism Uncovered, which is really an in-depth historical look at the 7 tropes that are consistent in anti-Semitism, including anti-Israel rhetoric, with suggestions on how we can tie and demonstrate for people why what is happening on campus in so many spaces is unacceptable and belongs in the Rubicon of unacceptable hate, if you will, and needs to be opposed by administrators with the same vigor that other forms of hate is opposed. And thank you for the time, and it's been a pleasure.